Peace be upon you, and God's mercy and blessings. For over 50 years, the topic of Americans landing on the moon in the 1960s has remained a thorny, unresolved issue. One camp believes the Americans genuinely went there at that time, while another believes it was the biggest hoax in modern history. The question that keeps coming up is, why is this still unsettled? Why, after more than half a century, is the debate still open and people are still arguing? Why is there no definitive proof, one way or the other, to close this file once and for all? Welcome, everyone. I'm Abdullah. But before we begin, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so our videos reach you as soon as they're uploaded. The famous scene of American astronaut Neil Armstrong stepping onto the moon's surface and saying, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," was a declaration of America's victory in the space race against the Soviet Union. But over time, once the excitement settled, people started asking questions, and those questions gradually turned into full-blown conspiracy theories. Skeptics ask, how did the primitive technology of the 1960s manage to get astronauts to the moon and bring them back? And when they examined the videos and photos NASA presented, they found small, illogical details, like the flag waving despite there being no air on the moon, the absence of stars in the sky, and lighting that looked like it came from studio floodlights rather than the sun, among other things. On the other side, scientists and astronomers had responses, such as the rocks brought back from the moon, or the equipment still sitting on the lunar surface. But not everyone was convinced by either side. Today, I'm not here to tell you whether they went or didn't go. I'm going to break down the conspiracy theories piece by piece, along with the rebuttals, and keep the presentation as neutral as possible, so we can try to understand, did a human being really walk on the moon one day, or was it the biggest hoax of the 20th century?
The space race. To understand the story from the beginning, we need to go back to 1957, when the Soviet Union shocked the world by launching Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite in history. We need to understand that the space race was never about serving humanity or a passion for discovery. It was pure power struggle. Who could develop intercontinental ballistic missiles, and who could dominate the future? Initially, the Soviets were clearly superior, from the dog Laika to Yuri Gagarin, and America's position was deeply embarrassing before the world. That's why President Kennedy came out and threw down his last card, boldly declaring, "We're going to the moon." And under this pressure, astronomical budgets were allocated to the Apollo program and its predecessors, equivalent in today's prices to over $300 billion. Here's an important point worth pausing at. Did America exploit this situation and set an economic trap for the Soviets? The theory goes that if the Americans faked the landing in a studio, they hit two birds with one stone. They won the propaganda war and forced the Soviets to drain their real resources and billions of rubles in a phantom space race, assuming America had surpassed them. Especially knowing that the space race was among the causes that contributed to the actual fall of the Soviet Union, they spent enormous sums in a desperate attempt to catch up with Americans who had suddenly and inexplicably surged ahead. The idea that America pulled a con isn't far-fetched, especially since by 2026, we've seen dozens of American operations exposed as fraudulent, things that were taken as given for 70 years. So we have every right to ask, and ask forcefully, was what we saw a genuine engineering achievement or a strategic deception?
Part 1. Claims skeptics made with no convincing rebuttal. First, the original recording tapes. In 2006, NASA admitted it had lost around 700 boxes containing the original flight data recordings, including Armstrong's first steps. The official explanation was that the tapes were erased and recorded over to save costs. An agency spending billions of dollars on a national project couldn't buy new tapes, so they erased the most important recording in human history? That's absurd. And it led skeptics to conclude that if the tapes existed today, modern technology could easily detect errors that would expose the whole thing, which is why NASA claimed they were gone. Second, the Sea Rock.
In photos from Apollo 16, a rock appeared with the letter C clearly printed on it, as if we were on a film set. What would carve the letter C onto a moon rock? NASA's response was strange. They claimed the C wasn't a letter at all, but a hair that accidentally got on the negative during scanning, and by pure coincidence, it resembled a C. When they rescanned the original negative, they said the C wasn't there, but many people weren't convinced. Third, the first press conference. The first press conference of Apollo 11's crew, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, was deeply unsettling. All three sat as if they were at a funeral, eyes downcast, visibly tense, looking like they were carrying a heavy burden. When asked whether they saw stars while on the moon, they began stumbling over their words, using vague language like approximately and as I recall, as if they were afraid of going off script. This had a significant effect on a lot of people. Fourth, and perhaps the biggest unanswered question, why has NASA never returned to the moon after the Apollo program? If you succeeded with the primitive technology of the 1960s, why can't you do it again in the age of artificial intelligence? And not just NASA, why has no other country in the world been able to do it? The answer is always high cost and no need to spend those enormous sums on lunar missions again with UAPIC.
Part 2. Skeptic claims that NASA actually addressed from the moon's surface. First, the docking maneuver in space. The small capsule that launched from the moon's surface was supposed to dock with the command module, which was orbiting the moon at 5,700 miles per hour. Picture it, someone holding a pistol trying to shoot one bullet with another bullet flying through the darkness. How did they calculate the rendezvous trajectory with that precision using 1969 technology, especially when the computer on Apollo had less computing power than a modern calculator or a cheap smartwatch? And to add to that, last year we saw two astronauts, Butch Wilmore and Sunita Williams, stranded at the International Space Station for over 280 days due to a helium leak in their capsule. So how? NASA's response was that yes, the computers were limited but adequate for the task. Complex calculations were handled by servers on Earth, and crucially, final control was in the hands of highly trained pilots, not amateurs. Docking had been practiced extensively in the Gemini missions years before Apollo. Neil Armstrong himself demonstrated his competence in Gemini 8 in 1966, successfully docking with the Agena rocket and saving the craft from a dangerous spin, with nerves of steel, which was part of why he was chosen for the Apollo moon mission. Success wasn't overnight. It was built over years through programs like Mercury, 1958 to 63, and Gemini, 1962 to 66. And not all Apollo missions were successful. The Apollo 1 tragedy on January 27, 1967, killed all three crew members, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, when the capsule caught fire, which led NASA to completely redesign their spacecraft. Second, no stars in the photos. Logic suggests that on the moon's surface, with no atmosphere or clouds, we should see millions of stars. Did NASA just leave the background black in the studio because they were afraid of drawing the stars wrong? NASA's answer: the photos were taken during the lunar day, but the sky was black. How? Because without an atmosphere to scatter light and make the sky blue like on Earth, the sky stays black even when the sun is out. Stars are present at night and disappear during the day due to intense sunlight. To properly expose the astronauts and rocks under that brilliant sunlight, the camera's sensitivity and shutter speed had to be adjusted accordingly. Had they tried to capture the faint starlight, the astronauts would have appeared as featureless white blobs from overexposure. Third, the waving flag. The flag appears to move as if a breeze is blowing it, but the moon has no atmosphere, so there should be no wind. Did they forget to turn off a fan in the studio? NASA's response: engineers knew a regular flag would hang limp, so they designed the flagpole with an inverted L-shaped horizontal rod to keep the fabric spread out. Because the rod wasn't fully extended, the slight wrinkles visible in the footage appeared. As for the movement itself, it's inertia. When the astronaut planted and twisted the pole to secure it, the vibration transferred through his hands to the fabric. With no air to provide resistance and damping, the flag kept oscillating for a long time until the energy dissipated. It's not wind, it's the absence of anything to stop it.
And if you look carefully at the footage, once the astronaut lets go, the flag keeps moving for a bit, then freezes in place, with the wrinkles still there. There's also an ironic point. The people who doubt the moon landing because of no air are accepting no air as a fact from the very same sources they're doubting. Why believe them about no air, but not about there being space?
Fourth, the shadows. Physically, if the sun is the only light source, all shadows should be parallel and pointing in the same direction. But in Apollo photos, shadows go in different directions, as if there are studio floodlights. Specialists responded that this has nothing to do with artificial lighting. It's a matter of photographic perspective. If you stand in the middle of a long road or on railway tracks and look ahead, the two parallel lines appear to converge at the horizon. That's perspective, something any geometry student knows. That's exactly what happened in the photos. Furthermore, the idea of multiple light sources is physically naive. Any light source, no matter how powerful, dims with distance, the inverse square law. Yet in the moon photos, the entire surface is evenly lit. Distant mountains lit just as brightly as the astronauts' feet, something only a massive star like the sun could achieve. NVIDIA ran a full photon mapping simulation of lunar lighting conditions in 2014, and the results were a perfect match for NASA's photos. Fifth, the Van Allen belts. Earth is surrounded by dangerous radiation zones known as the Van Allen belts, and anyone traveling from Earth to the moon must pass through them. How did an aluminum capsule with primitive 1960s spacesuits protect humans from this lethal radiation? Skeptics argue they should have gotten cancer or died. NASA's response: the astronauts passed through the belts at high speed, so their radiation exposure was brief and calculated. The trajectory was precisely plotted to pass through the thinnest part of the belts, avoiding the densest zones. They compared the dose received to a standard X-ray for a broken bone. And ironically, NASA and the researchers credited with discovering those belts, including Van Allen himself, were the ones who mapped them using Explorer 1 and 3 satellites. So why believe NASA about the existence of the belts, but not about navigating through them? Sixth, launching from the moon without a launch pad. You launched from Earth with a Saturn V rocket the size of a skyscraper, a massive launch pad, ground support crews, and a big event, but you returned in a capsule the size of a tuna can with no launch pad on the moon? Because this question has many technical details, we'll dedicate a separate episode to it, coming out in a few days.
Part 3. The strong evidence supporting NASA. First, and the strongest card in the deck, Soviet confirmation. We're talking about the height of the Cold War. The Russians were monitoring every signal from Apollo with their radar systems. If they had detected that the signal was coming from a studio on Earth rather than the moon, they would have exposed America in the most spectacular fashion. Their silence and their acknowledgement of the landing is the strongest evidence of its authenticity. Add to that the logical impossibility of the conspiracy itself. The Apollo program employed 400,000 people, engineers, workers, and staff. How do you guarantee the loyalty and silence of that army for 50 years? The idea that not one of them had a conscience or sold the secret for money is statistically absurd. Second, the physical evidence. 382 kilograms of moon rocks. NASA didn't lock these away and say, just trust us. The rocks were distributed to laboratories and universities in over 135 countries around the world. Egypt received samples, currently held in the Egyptian Geological Museum. Soviet scientists analyzed samples and confirmed their chemical and geological composition was completely different from any rock found on Earth. The Soviet Academy of Sciences verified the samples were authentic. If the Soviets had any doubt those rocks were faked, they would have exposed America before the entire world. Third, photographic confirmation from multiple nations. In 2009, NASA sent the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO, to photograph the moon in high resolution from low altitude, and it captured the landing sites, with the equipment and bases left behind. You might say that's still NASA. Fair point. But India, China, and Japan also sent spacecraft that photographed the same sites and saw the same artifacts.
After this long journey, when we gather all the threads together, we find that, yes, there are many question marks surrounding this topic, but at the same time, there is physical and technical evidence that is very hard to explain away as pure theater. It's plausible that the Americans' moon landing actually happened, but that some of the photos and footage we saw were enhanced or partially reshot on Earth for propaganda purposes to make it look spectacular.
that possibility is far more likely than the entire thing being a hoax from start to finish. There is almost certainly some deception involved, but where exactly the deception lies is still unresolved to this day. Don't forget to come back in a few days for the follow-up episode. That's it for now. Who made it all the way to the end? Everyone who did, you're the best. Hit the like button before you leave so we know how many of you made it. And if a question comes to you in the middle of the night, write it in the comments and we'll answer it. Peace.